A week doesn't sound like a long time until you decide to completely change the way you use your computer. That's exactly what happened when a group of everyday Windows users agreed to ditch everything they were comfortable with and switch to Linux for 7 full days. No dual boot safety net, no going back halfway through, and no shortcuts. Just a clean break from everything familiar. At first, it sounded like a fun experiment. By the end of it, it turned into something far more revealing than anyone expected. Most of these users had been on Windows for years, some for decades. Their habits were deeply ingrained. They knew exactly where everything lived, how to fix common problems, and how to get things done quickly. Switching to Linux wasn't just about learning a new operating system. It was about breaking years of muscle memory and stepping into something completely different. And the reactions started almost immediately. The first day was chaos, not because Linux is inherently difficult, but because it's unfamiliar. Even something as simple as installing software felt strange. On Windows, you go to a website, download an installer, click next a few times, and you're done. On Linux, especially for first-time users, the idea of a package manager felt both fascinating and confusing. The concept of opening a software store and installing apps with one click was surprisingly refreshing. But the moment someone mentioned using the terminal, things got tense. There's a kind of fear associated with the terminal, especially among people who've never used it before. It looks intimidating. It feels like one wrong command could break everything. But something interesting happened. By the end of day 2, many users started realizing that the terminal wasn't their enemy. In fact, it was often faster than the graphical interface. Tasks that would take multiple clicks on Windows could be done with a single command. That realization alone started shifting perspectives, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. Compatibility quickly became a major issue. Many users rely on specific software that simply doesn't exist on Linux. Programs like Adobe Photoshop, Microsoft Office in its full desktop form, or certain proprietary tools just aren't available natively. Some tried alternatives like GIMP or LibreOffice. Their reactions were mixed. Some were impressed by how capable these alternatives were. Others felt frustrated that their usual workflows didn't translate perfectly. Gaming was another big topic. For years, Linux had a reputation for being terrible for gaming. That's been changing. But not everyone was prepared for the reality. Thanks to tools like Proton and Steam's growing support for Linux, many popular games actually worked surprisingly well. Some users were genuinely shocked when their favorite titles launched without issues. Others ran into problems with anti-cheat systems or performance inconsistencies. It wasn't perfect, but it was far better than expected. Performance, in general, became one of the most surprising aspects of the experiment. Many participants were using older machines that struggled on Windows. Once they switched to Linux, especially lightweight distributions, those same machines felt faster, smoother, and more responsive. Boot times improved, applications opened quicker, the system felt less bloated. It was one of those moments where people started questioning whether they actually needed high-end hardware or if their operating system had been holding them back. Customization was another eye-opener. Windows offers some level of personalization, but Linux takes it to an entirely different level. From changing desktop environments to tweaking every visual detail, users quickly realized they had complete control over how their system looked and behaved. Some went all in, spending hours customizing themes, icons, and layouts. Others found it overwhelming. Too many options can be just as intimidating as too few. Then there were the small things, the everyday habits that suddenly didn't work the same way. File paths were different. Software installation worked differently. Even basic shortcuts sometimes behaved in unexpected ways. These weren't major issues, but they added up. It's those tiny friction points that make a new system feel unfamiliar. And for some users, that was enough to create frustration. By day 3, the initial shock had worn off, and something interesting started happening. People began adapting. They stopped trying to force Linux to behave like Windows and started learning how Linux actually works. That shift in mindset made a huge difference. Tasks that felt difficult on day 1 became easier. The system started to make more sense. Confidence grew. Security and privacy also became part of the conversation. Many users had never really thought about how their operating system handles data. Linux, being open source, gave them a sense of transparency and control they hadn't experienced before. There were no forced updates restarting their system at inconvenient times. No hidden telemetry running in the background. That alone made some participants feel more in control of their own machines. Of course, not everything was perfect. Hardware compatibility issues did come up. Some users struggled with Wi-Fi drivers or printer setups. While many modern Linux distributions handle hardware quite well, it's not always seamless. For someone used to plug-and-play simplicity, even a small issue can feel like a big obstacle. As the week progressed, the experiment started revealing something deeper. It wasn't just about whether Linux was better or worse than Windows. It was about how people interact with technology. Windows is designed to be familiar and consistent. Linux, on the other hand, is flexible and customizable. That difference changes the entire experience. By day 5, opinions started to solidify. Some users were genuinely enjoying the experience. They liked the speed, the control, and the lack of unnecessary clutter. Others were still struggling with software compatibility and workflow disruptions. It became clear that Linux isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It works incredibly well for some use cases, but not for everyone. One of the most surprising outcomes was how many users said they learned more about their computers in 1 week of using Linux than they had in years of using Windows. The system encourages exploration. It doesn't hide everything behind layers of abstraction. That can be intimidating at first, but it also makes the experience more educational. By the final day, the big question was simple. Would they switch permanently? The answers were mixed, but not in the way you might expect. Some users decided to fully switch to Linux. They found it empowering and efficient. Others chose to go back to Windows, but with a new perspective. They appreciated its convenience more, but also recognized its limitations. A significant number of participants landed somewhere in the middle. They decided to use both. Linux for certain tasks, Windows for others. That hybrid approach turned out to be surprisingly practical. It allowed them to take advantage of the strengths of each system without being limited by their weaknesses. The real shock wasn't that Linux was better or worse than Windows. It was how much the experience changed people's understanding of what an operating system can be. For years, many users had accepted Windows as the default without questioning it. This experiment challenged that assumption. It also highlighted something important about comfort zones. People tend to stick with what they know, not necessarily because it's the best option, but because it's familiar. Stepping outside of that comfort zone, even for just a week, can completely change how you see things. In the end, the experiment wasn't about proving one system superior to the other. It was about exploration, learning, and perspective. Linux didn't magically solve every problem. Windows didn't suddenly become obsolete, but the experience of switching, even temporarily, revealed something valuable. Technology isn't just about tools. It's about how those tools shape the way we work, think, and interact with the digital world. And sometimes, all it takes is a week of trying something different to completely change that perspective. What started as a simple experiment turned into a deeper realization. The operating system you use isn't just a background layer, it's a fundamental part of your daily experience. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That's what shocked everyone the most. Not the performance, not the customization, not even the challenges. It was the realization that they had more choice, more control, and more possibilities than they ever thought. And once that door is opened, it's very hard to close again.